So we're just going to go through a quick overview of what's changed. So we've added an enhancement to limit the amount of exposure inside the radome. We've added the ability to specify power in dBm. We've made antenna information available in the modeler. We've added the ability to export exclusion zones. And then we spent quite a bit of time improving the performance of the IXUS Manager. And then, as you can see from the slides, for those of you who've been with us for a while, we've also updated our branding. Let us begin with the first one. So from the way the math works, it is, so if you look at this equation here that denotes the E field, but also would govern, the same principle would govern the power density. When you get very close to the radiating elements, this R over here becomes very small. And if you remember from high school math or whatever math you still get to do in your life, a 1 over R shoots up very quickly as it gets very small. And so what this leads to is very, very large values near the antenna that aren't practical, that are true to the math, but aren't practical for compliance purposes, simply because you're probably not going to climb inside the antenna radome. And so what we've done for what we've now listed as two separate things, because although they're the same thing from the user perspective, they're quite largely different from our side as developers, is limiting the value of R over here, so the value by which we divide to the dimensions of the radome. So we've done this for our panel antenna synthesis and omnidirectional synthesis, and for our custom antenna synthesis. So that's usually more complex models or models we can't create using the panel or omni method. So you can simply see here that beforehand it was easy to get power values as high as to the power of 14, and now that sort of caps out at to the power of 5. So more realistic values for compliance purposes. So and then secondly, like I said, we also had to do this for the custom antennas. Some of the existing models had geometries that weren't favorable to our implementation of this. And so if you do have any of these models currently in your manager, they'll need to be updated so that for this version. Then next is we've added the option to specify the input power in dBm or watts. Obviously here you have the issue of 0 watts not mapping to a real number in terms of dBm, because that's the log graph and it's also asymptotic. So we've denoted that instead with a hyphen. And this can be adjusted under the edit preferences, but we'll go through that. I'll demonstrate that. Then antenna information in the modeler. So this is useful for especially more complex antenna models. What you'll now be able to do is click a little button in the modeler and it'll show you, for example, the antenna usage information, which is important for things like, say now, mutzings, and can be important for what we call unified antenna models, which is a model where you can have the different in a single antenna model.
You're back. Sorry,
All right.
Continue.
Okay. As well as things like the frequency bands, the associated ports, gain, horizontal beam width. For this to take effect, you will need to clear your antenna cache. So you have a local antenna cache that the modeler uses that is updated every time you touch base with the manager, but it will need to refresh the entire thing. And so to do that on the local side, you're going to need to go to program data, IXUS antennas, and delete both the file and the folder there. You might not see this file path, so you can't necessarily click your way there if hidden files are hidden on your operating system. So you might have to copy paste this path to get there. Then making it possible to export exclusion zone meshes to a file so that they can be used in other CAD tools. And so here you have the .IGS file format. All right, and then before we move on to this, I'm just going to display some of what I've just discussed in the model itself. So here I have, so for example, this antenna along with this one can sort of make the case for the displaying of antenna information in the modeler. If I go to the details tab and I press information here, you can see that this piece of usage information, which would be absolutely critical to use this model properly, wouldn't be present. You need to only see, the only other time you'd see it is in the portal, and now you can see it right here. And so this is to simulate an EIRP. Because this antenna is configured in EIRP, you need to enter a certain, ridiculously low wattage. And another example of this, where this is very, very helpful, is, for example, with this model, the CommScope model, where now you can see I've now entered the frequency band, and these two specific frequency bands are allocated to ports, and so what those ports represent can be seen here in the information. You can see that port 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is to do with determines the 27-degree azimuth rotation, and 3, 4, 3, the others then for the negative 27. And so you can see here's 3 and 7 in terms of down tilts, and you can see those are the two different down tilts. So that's the idea there. You can also see that running a slice through the center of the antenna at max here yields roughly 6,000% instead of 6 million, and here roughly 1,000. So then let's go and go to preferences, go to general options, and here you can see we can specify things in terms of watt. And of course here, in terms of dBm, here we had 1 milliwatt, which in dBm is, oops, did I misclick? Oh, I had it in dBm, now it's in watt. Okay, well, then you've seen what it looks like in dBm. I'll go back to dBm. And so here you can see that, of course, 1 milliwatt is 0 dBm, and 0 watts is now a dash, because that's how we've decided to represent it in dBm. And then last but not least, you can file export exclusion zones, and you can export an IGS. And then I found this cumbersome and weird IGS view online, but there you go. There's one of the meshes that we have present in the modeler being displayed here. It's all the weirdness going on here has nothing to do with us. I should have found a better one. Yeah. Okay, and then this, as you can tell, as far as looking inside the modeler goes, this isn't the flashiest release we've ever done. It doesn't have the largest amount of nice new numbers and things to click on, but a lot of time and effort was spent on the manager, and yeah, and some big boy stuff that aren't as much fun but are very, very necessary. So when it comes to the manager, we've had to set up the support for what will be coming in the next version of IXUS, which is the segment-wise EMF attenuation. So this doesn't exist yet in the modeler. This has just been set up in the manager so that when we have it in the modeler, we can support the functionality. Next, and this was a big one, and it affects the larger clients a lot more than the smaller clients, but the modeler made a lot of calls to the manager that were effectively redundant and put strain on the manager database and the manager database system. And so we've reduced the number of calls that the modeler makes to the manager. For the bigger clients, you may very well notice a speed change. This also fixes a deadlock issue, which is something that happens when two people try to use certain tables within the database at the same time. For most of you, what you'll basically experience is much less of this popping up while saving sites to the manager and getting them back from the manager. Next, and then we also removed these dummy logins that we used to essentially check the state of the hosted manager instance, but they did clutter the logs. So for any of you who do use the logs, which I actually assume is mostly just support actually, but who do use the logs to figure out what's going on, those are now much more useful and decluttered. Then we added additional content controls for reporting purposes, and then a lot of roughly 23 bug fixes and so on and so forth. Two that I really appreciate is the antenna update progress bar is now shows in the taskbar. So sometimes it would look as though the modeler wasn't open because the modeler was busy updating antennas, even though it was open, but it wouldn't show up in the taskbar. And then secondly, importing models with like just mismatched frequency band aliases would cause errors. But this isn't really a problem so much in the US market because I don't think you guys share IXUS.XS files with each other as much as down under. And then the new branding, which I'm pretty sure some of you have already seen, which is just a lot prettier. We've put a lambda in our X because lambda relates to frequency. And yeah, that's pretty good. Then the usual for IXUS antenna model requests, please feel free to log a ticket or email us at support@ixusapp.com. And thank you for listening. Thank you for showing up.